Lunar the Silver Star follows a young man named Alex who's best described as obsessed with adventure. He idolizes it so much that each day he goes out to pay his respects to a fallen hero of old named Dine, who was one of 4 warriors that once sealed a great evil away. Alex, along with his family and friends, live in peaceful times that are just begging for something dark and sinister to resurface. And wouldn't you know it, it eventually does. Even with a relatively cliché storyline, Lunar the Silver Star does a lot of things really well compared to other games from the time. For starters, the translation efforts from Japanese were really high quality. Other than the egregious overuse of "a lot," I can only think of a single time when something was blatantly incorrect and confusing enough to throw me off of the progress trail. If anything, at times, the writing's almost too good. The translators, being extremely in touch with their audience, contributed to some aspects of the dialogue coming across as trying too hard to be cool or funny. Many of my feelings around this sentiment stem from pop culture references and real-world ones that were stuffed in all over the place. I'm obviously playing this game way later than it was originally intended, but even if I've been an adult back then, I'm still not so sure that those jokes would have hit the mark for me. In my own playthrough, the only thing that being reminded of an old TV commercial or now defunct companies achieved was tearing me right out of the setting that's otherwise effortlessly built through the great plot and its compelling characters. I'm as much of a fan of comic relief as the next person, but I like it a lot more when it's cleverly added into a game rather than being tacked on like this. The dialogue isn't the only delivery method for the story either. As you might expect with a CD game, there are a bunch of short cutscenes that pop up, sometimes voiced and sometimes not, that serve the purpose of introducing important characters or marching the plot along. I'd say that the visual presentation was great in these instances, but the voice acting swung a little too close to the "what is a man" conversation from Castlevania Symphony of the Night. It was fine for what it was, but there was some professional luster lacking here. On the topic of sound, I also couldn't get over how unbalanced the sound effects and music from the console were compared to the stuff coming off of the CD. The volume difference was astonishing. Uh-oh. That's crazy. We ended up using a modified setup by taking audio out of the headphone jack instead of the ports at the back of the console. Doing it this way, we had some control over the console volume and were able to mix the 2 outputs a lot better. Something like this seems like a huge oversight, but at least if you ever play this with a Model 1 Genesis, this is a workaround that fixed the problem for me. Anyway, one of my favorite parts of this game was the big cast of characters that you get to adventure with, but it's not only the chosen few who fill out your playable party that are developed here. All of the people they're close to, and even the folks in the towns that they come from, are important in deepening the immersion. Every conversation you have is fleshed out with great care, making the world of Lunar feel interconnected and memorable. There's occasional duplicate text here and there, but it's pretty rare. If you play this game, I really hope that you like reading a lot. Even the translation notes commented on the sheer volume of material that had to be localized, and they weren't kidding. With respect to the people in the main party, while I did enjoy their individual story arcs, the thing that made them especially impressive to me was how seamlessly they all intertwined with Alex's quest and its purpose. There's not a single adventurer that joins you for trivial reasons. They all have strong personal motivations and a lot riding on the outcome of Alex's journey, making for some real tangible tension rather than the flimsy excuse of convenience in other games. If these were generic characters who, say, knocked on your door and asked to team up to fight the great evil of the world without any real development after that, the narrative would have been significantly less effective. By the time the credits scrolled, I was genuinely invested in seeing how things would pan out for these people, and I felt like I knew quite a bit about them. Much of the character development was grown out of candid conversations between party members as they mulled over new plot developments or even played off of one another as they explored town after town. It wasn't the usual method of only having them speak when there was trouble right in front of them. And in my own experience playing games from this early in the 90s, it's rare to see this much effort around interpersonal interaction. I can only think of a couple of others that do this well, and unsurprisingly, they're also some favorites of mine. Another really great thing that helps to enhance the storytelling here is how the characters gain experience points for plot-related achievements as well as battling their foes. This more or less removed the need to grind at any point, but also had a secondary function of highlighting really important events. Other games have a tendency to gloss over many major battle wins or have a list of fetch quests so long that the sense of accomplishment for larger tasks can feel watered down. I wish more games did this, since I liked feeling rewarded for making it through tough legs of the game. The combat here was also a great deal of fun. In turn-based games where attacking or casting spells from one side of an arena is all that you have to stare at for hours on end, Lunar presented a nice change of pace where characters in your party moved to meet up with their adversaries. This introduced a brand new to me type of turn-based strategy that might be more familiar for those of you that are well versed in tactical RPGs. I've never played one of those, and while this is by no means a true strategy game, it was novel for me to plan out each encounter while having to consider the number of moves and hits that each character could make if I was going for a melee approach. Many of my personal efforts stemmed from studying how different groups moved and trying to get my hard-hitting characters right up in the center of a bunch of them to take down multiple monsters at once. I will admit that this system did take me a while to get used to, and sometimes I wish that I could just turn my brain off after the bajillionth random encounter. Even still, I found the combat really engaging and enjoyed these innovations. The breadth of magic to dabble in was really diverse, with each of the caster characters taking on a main role or job of sorts. There was some overlap, like multiple characters being able to restore HP, but much of the specialized stuff was restricted to a single person, making them all feel valuable as party members. The only qualm that I had with the magic system was not knowing what some of the spells did. Something like Bye Bye Air being a shadow spell, or Sandspike being a wind-based one, wouldn't have been things that I could have put together on my own. The manual has a list of many of the spells, items, and equipment that you'll have access to, but later in the game, all of the new things that I was finding were nowhere to be found here. Sadly, this was probably a mechanism to sell strategy guides at the time, but as someone playing the game several decades after the fact, it would have been nice to have everything in one place with the game purchase, like many of the titles that came before this one. Because of the ambiguity in some cases, there were a couple of items that I carried from near the beginning of the game all the way to the end, while never quite figuring out their function. One example of this was my little lasso-wielding cowboy here that's actually a music box. He came with me to the realm beyond the final boss, and given how unruly item storage is, that's not really a good thing at all. If I had to name a very frustrating aspect of this game, it's definitely the inventory. It doesn't take long to see what the problems are. Multiples don't stack, and many items are not identifiable without scrolling over them first. All of the herbs look very similar, as do star and silver lights, making it confusing to remember which ones are which, never mind which ones are the stronger ones by name alone. Being the hoarder that I am in RPGs, I quickly ran out of space and had a terrible time deciding what to sell and what to keep. Each character thankfully has a personal inventory where equipped stuff resides, but any extra space was packed full of the things that I might need later, like magic essences, healing items, or MP restoratives. As you travel the overworld, there are plenty of opportunities to restore MP and HP at stone monuments, so I didn't really feel the need to burn through healing items as often as I might in other games. On occasions where I did want to use an herb to heal up, it was usually only to make room for a new thing that I'd found while exploring. With that said, there's one fairly significant drawback to this already dysfunctional system. You're actually limited on what items can be used inside of a battle, and only the things inside of a character's personal inventory can be accessed from the item menu. If you happen to be on the brink of death and need that herb in your general inventory section, you're out of luck. Being used to other games where you could access your entire inventory at any time, I could never personally get used to that extra layer of organization. I understand the desire on a developer's part to create a higher level of player immersion, but whether it was intended to or not, my forgetful self was made to suffer for this feature's existence. Even with these quirks, the overall difficulty of the game was on the easy side. I might have been over-leveled with all of the wandering around that I did, so I can't really describe any instances where enemy encounters suddenly felt over my head. There were some places where I did feel an appropriate degree of enemy pushback, but not so much that I had to retreat and go back to an earlier place to grind levels or anything. My excessive experience point total came about because I regularly needed to wander around searching for a means to advance the story. On many occasions, a character will very plainly tell you where you need to go next, but if you head there right away, there will usually be some sort of artificial blockade barring your progress. Someone will be standing in a doorway, a broken path or bridge will prevent you from moving forward, you name it. The way this seems to work is that a couple of additional events need to take place first, usually in the form of finding and speaking to several other people to trigger the path to clear. My main issue was figuring out who those trigger people were and where to find them. There are tons of NPCs in Lunar, probably more than in any other game I've played. As I mentioned earlier, every person you meet has a lot to say, and then you have to listen to it all on the quest to find the single person that will push things along. And I thought that this was a little bit weird after you already had a directive to follow up on. When I'd get stuck, I'd backtrack and revisit the previous few towns I'd been to and talk to everyone again, sometimes multiple times, until something changed. This made the adventure feel bumpy in spots where the forward momentum would wane for a while. Lunar presents this facade of open-worldedness that just isn't real. You still have to perform tasks in a very specific order, and I feel like other games did a better job of shuttling you around to unlock progress much more rationally than this one did. Between the many overworld hikes and town visits are maze-like areas that take you into caverns, sprawling buildings, underground passages, and more. When I think of these kinds of experiences that were overwhelming in other games, the ones in Lunar comparatively felt just right. Many of them were small enough to avoid needing to map them, and there was only one time where I had to buckle down and put pen to paper to make sense of things. If there were multiple paths to take on a single floor, usually most of them would clearly dead end and direct you to the correct one by default. There was a lot of stuff to find as a reward for exploring, but the unfortunate part is that most things in chests are pretty generic. Maybe 5 to 10% of stuff is unique equipment or weapons, but the rest are the same things you can find from enemy drops or shops that are easily available to you once you can fast travel between towns. Many of the magic essences I found in late game were equivalent to low-level magic spells that just clogged up my inventory, or made me feel like a criminal every time I dropped them on the ground in the middle of a cave. Paired with that inventory strife I mentioned earlier, it's frustrating hitting a bunch of random encounters while exploring a branch of a maze with a chest at the end, only to find that your reward is yet another mint essence. The music in Lunar ranged from extremely beautiful to mediocre. Some was unforgettable, while other songs just felt uninspired. The cave music is a good example of something that I would have loved to hear at least 90% less than I did. The tunes in general are not exactly what I'd call diverse either, since a lot of them get recycled between different locations throughout the game. One of my favorites was actually the game over music, which I only had the pleasure of hearing one time when I wiped at the first big boss encounter after panicking. And hey, doesn't this track sound like Pink Floyd's One of These Days? In terms of the graphics, they were lovely, but I was surprised at how dull the colors were. There was a lot to look at, and the amount of detail in each new place was fantastic, but the color palette made it feel like all of the shine had been sucked out of many of these places. The caves were especially drab. They were always some variation on brown, with the same boring tire stacks lining the passageways. I really did enjoy the character sprite work though, especially when you'd enact the flee option in battle. Those on flee mode would put distance between themselves and the opposing monsters with their little hands raised to shield their little heads. I never got tired of seeing this. The character portraits during conversations were also really well done, but it was a little weird that they only ever had a single expression. When terrible things were going down, many of them would be smiling away as their world crumbled around them. I found this pretty funny, but given how polished so many other aspects of the visuals and writing were, this seemed like a curious choice. From beginning to end, Lunar the Silver Star was a charming journey. It has some of the best writing, story, and characters I've personally had the pleasure of adventuring with in an RPG. And if they just let me have a little more room in my pockets, this would easily be a near-perfect game for my personal preferences as an RPG enthusiast. The only sad part about finishing a game like this is knowing that there are so few others like it left to play on the Sega CD. There's something so magical to me about CD quality music and the 16-bit aesthetic that I love so much. And it's really too bad that there's so little of it to take in. But on the bright side, it also makes experiences like these that much more special. I'm definitely looking forward to my next adventure on this monster of a console.